Hey guys, it's Izzy here with Vlogmas Day 23. Today we're going to be talking about the worst books of 2020. Yesterday I uploaded the best books of 2020, so now we have to go to the other side. If you've seen my unhaul that I uploaded last week or over the weekend, then you've probably seen the majority of these books already. I'm scared. I will admit, I am nervous for this because some of these may be people's favorite books, but I mean, do I care? No, not really, because I have my thoughts and opinions and I am secure in those thoughts. So here we go. So like my best books of the year, we're doing it by month. So January, my least favorite book is actually right here, and that is Sweet Tea and Sympathy. This is a Southern romance book. I think it'd probably be more contemporary than romance, but I mean, it's a mix. It's not like a really steamy, smutty romance. It's just more fluffy. So that's why I have a hard time calling it romance, because it doesn't have people in the cover or anything, but I think it was under my romance category of books. So this book, if you've read the other book before this, there's a novella. It's basically the same tropes, and I'm like, if every book in this series is gonna be like this, it's gonna be so annoying. But this book was very predictable, and I think the main character deserved more, and that's what I always think in romance books. At least in contemporary romances, I'm always like, oh, she deserves so much better. She does not need to be with him. And I think the man that she gets with, I don't think they're a good fit. I don't think they would last personally. I think they want different things in life, but I guess the characters don't see it the writer didn't see it that way. So February, my least favorite book was a classic, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I'm actually reading a Charles Dickens book right now. His writing, I feel like I couldn't get into the plot in this. That was my main thing until the very end. The end was amazing, and what made it a 4-star instead of a 3-star. But throughout the whole rest of it, I was very much confused of settings and everything. If you want to read Charles Dickens, I would recommend reading one of his short stories or novellas. They're easier to get into than his full-length novels. But yeah, I just found it really confusing. And another thing for classics, to let y'all know, I think it's so much easier to do an audiobook for me personally than reading it physically. I mean, it kind of depends on the classic as well, but I seem to get more into them and get more out of it if I do the audiobook. So in March, my least favorite book was Clock Dance. And March wasn't a strong reading month for me, so there wasn't a lot to choose from, so that doesn't mean this book is terrible. This was a contemporary that I literally picked up on a whim. I was out in Arizona. I didn't bring any books with me, so I was just like, okay, I'll read this because I went to Barnes & Noble. This book, I think it might be better for an older audience, since the main character is literally like in her 60s, but it's not that. It goes throughout her whole life, but I just found it boring. Again, I've talked about it before, and you'll see with other books on this list, I am not a huge slice of life person. I don't like reading slice of life. So in April, the worst book of April was Severance. This is a book during a pandemic. It's a satire, and in this book there was like no punctuation. I talked about this in the unhaul. It was quotes, and like there were no quotes. Like you couldn't tell the characters were actually talking or just thinking, and I was just finding myself getting so confused. If you want a pandemic book, I recommend Nora Roberts' Year One. That was one of my favorite books, and I think that was my favorite in March. So I don't recommend Severance. No. In May, the least favorite was Timekeeper. This is a steampunk historical fantasy. I don't know if that'd be more fantasy or sci-fi. I don't remember what category. I think it was actually under historical fiction, but there's elements of spirits, and if a clock stops, the world stops, that whole little town will just stop. And that's such an interesting plot. But just in the book, it wasn't interesting at all. And again, there are romances in this, because in YA fantasy, there has to be a romance. I felt like it was so toxic. The love interest, I hated him. So June, the worst book of June was The Bad Guys 1. This is a nonfiction book about, I think it's the 1986 Mets who won the World Series. They were known for their partying and sleeping around, drugs, drinking, yeah, all that kind of stuff. It was the 80s. It was the decade of decadence. This book, again, was another one that was all over the place. And then the parts that were like about games, I found really boring. I'm like, if I wanted to know, I can just go watch the game. They're on YouTube. In July, my least favorite book was Space Opera, which was a highly anticipated book for me. But in the book, I had like no idea what was going on. It was so random. And then there were sentences as long as paragraphs, and paragraphs as long as pages. It was not, the formatting was not good at all. So the editor, I don't know who it was, but they need to do a way better job. So in August, the worst book was Knight Errant. This is set in the Star Wars universe. This book was very plot heavy. As I only say, shorter books are more plot heavy. But there was never any down moments. Just everything was constantly happening. We were constantly moving. We didn't get just to sit down with the characters and get to know them. They were just constantly in action. And I'm somebody who prefers character-driven stuff, and I just didn't get it in that book. So September was The Year Without Summer. This is a book about a volcano eruption that did happen in history. All this happened in history in this book. That caused a mini ice age to happen, and later that caused the French Revolution. It gave us the book Frankenstein. It was the butterfly effect, basically. A volcano caused all these little things to happen, or big things. So there were a lot of character point of views. I mean, a lot. I was getting all the male characters confused, and none of these characters ever meet. They never connect. So I felt like it was kind of pointless. I think for this book, maybe do just have one person, one main character, or two. Like, I think there were too many, and so it couldn't really tie together nicely in the end. The only thing they all related in was living in the world in that year. So in October, my least favorite is, again, a classic. This is 100 Years of Solitude. So this is more of a modern classic. I didn't know that it was supposed to be magical realism. If I knew that, I think I would have enjoyed it more, because sometimes I was just like, what is happening? But this book has a lot of, I'm going to say, there are a lot of trigger warnings, so look into it. And then there were characters, every generation the characters had the same names, even when the previous generation was still living. And I didn't know which character was being talked about, because again, they had all the same names, and usually if you had that name, you had the same personality traits, and that was the thing within the book. So I was very confused about who is who. I think in literature, that's not a good idea to have characters with the same names. Yes, it does happen in real life, but in literature, it's really confusing for a reader. So in November, my least favorite book was One Foot in Eden. This is a thriller, mystery kind of novel. I just couldn't get into it. It wasn't bad. It was an average. It was a 3-star. Very short. I mean, it was kind of interesting, but at the same time, not. As I said, I couldn't get into the plot. So December, I have only read one book, and then I am about 60% to another book, and that is A Christmas Carol and Other Christmas Writings by Charles Dickens. The first book was by my favorite author, so this book is obviously my least favorite so far. It is better than A Tale of Two Cities. This is probably going to be a 3.5 star, and which technically by star ratings, that's not better. But I mean, I feel weird rating this because it's a short story collection rather than a novel, and I haven't really read another short story collection, so I don't know how I'm going to rate it yet. But Charles Dickens does have really beautiful writing, but I think some of his plots are hard to get into, and that's my only complaint. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow on Christmas Eve. Bye guys!